Hello everyone, welcome to today's demo. Today we're going to be diving into PowerShell Web Access, which might be your network's backdoor in plain sight. My name is Michael Haig. I want to thank you for joining in on this demo and listening in. Hopefully we will keep it in a timely fashion compared to the rest of the demos we do around here. What we're going to cover today is the Cybersecurity Advisory AA 24241A. We're going to look into PowerShell Web Access, what it is, how adversaries will use it, and then we will jump into our demo. All right, so first, the advisory here is on the CISA site, it's a Cybersecurity Advisory again. And this one is based off of an Iran-based cyber threat actor that they had published on a couple years ago and just more or less tracking them over time. And so what we have is that for their initial access and reconnaissance, they were focused on looking at public-facing applications. They would use tools like Shodan and whatnot for reconnaissance. They would scan for vulnerabilities out on the perimeter. Their persistence or privilege escalation, part of their TTPs here, they would deploy web shells on these perimeter devices. It could even be appliances on the edge. This group is kind of known for moving around out there, gaining access to VPNs and whatnot, create accounts, use stolen credentials, perform or use scheduled tasks and things like that. And then the piece where the advisory kind of lightly covers, they use remote access tools, they use something like ngrok. But the one piece here that I think is very interesting is PowerShell Web Access. It's lightly mentioned in the report. It's lightly mentioned on the main advisory. And then that's it. Nothing else. And then expel impact, right? So they collaborate with ransomware groups, steal data, extort to victims, kind of common stuff here. But the PowerShell piece stood out to me. I was like, wait a minute, PowerShell Web Access? Tell me more. And so I started digging into the PowerShell Web Access piece, and it ends up actually just being a Windows Server feature that, in this particular case, the adversary would enable on the Windows servers. And once it's enabled, you can access that server or any remote server using PowerShell Web Access. So once you have it on one, they would probably hit one box, and then they would kind of like fan out from that point, hitting any other machine within the organization that they were, getting into. So it is as it says. It's a web-based PowerShell console. It's run through IIS. So IIS would need to be enabled. They would enable that feature, and then they would install PowerShell Web Access feature. Works pretty much with all modern web browsers. It is an older feature, 2012, I believe it came out. Server 2012? No, sorry. Server 2016, I believe it came out with, or 2012, one of those. It's fairly old. It does use HTTPS. It requires authentication. You could use basic auth or 80 auth and everything like that as well. It will use, it's pretty much a console in the browser. So it will actually run scripts. You can copy and paste things in, drop it into the terminal and just let it run. For fun, I was able to run all of Invoke Atomic Test using it. So you can download things, install things, all the usual behavior you would expect out of PowerShell. So pretty sweet. Think of it as a pretty attractive target for threat actors. They can enable it if they're admin or whatnot in the environment on a server, on their beachhead box. They can enable PSWA, and then they can then start to fan out to other machines, run scripts on other machines, and do whatever they want. So I thought this was really interesting, just kind of unique, a little bit novel. So how do adversaries exploit it? So we kind of talked about it. There's a couple different ways to enable web access. You could do it through the GUI. You could just go into, add new features, install IIS, install PSWA, good to go. There are command line ways to do it, which could allow for like that silent enabling, which is pretty cool if you think about it from like an adversary perspective. I'm just going to enable this thing that grants me remote PowerShell access, and then I can hit any machine I want, which is pretty awesome. It's all based on the web, so there's no There's no real solid like EDR based type logs. Obviously, you will get your PowerShell logs on the machine that it's running on. You will see a parent-child process type spawn, things like that. All of that will still be there. There are authentication events, things like that too. So there will be some trails left behind, but you probably would need to put pieces back together to get back to, oh, they actually enabled PSWA. But that's where we're here to help you. So it gives them unauthorized access to one-to-many lateral movement. They can do different types of persistence this way. It's pretty sneaky. And so the little diagram here basically is kind of like going to be our demo. It's going to highlight logging into PSWA on one machine, changing the computer name to connect to a remote machine, and then run commands on that remote machine. So it's important to see and understand this because I think as defenders, most folks may not have heard of this tool or knew that it existed, but the fact that an adversary is going through and enabling it and then using it is almost like another level, right? Especially something not so common. All right, so we're gonna hop into our demo. We will first enable PowerShell Web Access. We'll log into it. We'll fan out, perform some lateral movement, run a bunch of atomic tests, things like that, just to see what we can get into. All right, let's hit it. All right, so we're going to go ahead and kick off our demo here now. First, I want to highlight the ways to enable PSWA. So to start, I wrote a very simple script that basically just checks for privileges. You're an admin, and then from there, it will install PowerShell Web Access, the feature. It will install IIS if it's not there. Once that's all set, it then configures it with a very basic, what they call test certificate. And that's using the commandlet here, install PSWA web application. And then from there, we will use the authorization role commandlet here. That just basically says any user can access any computer with any config. So it just kind of opens it wide. So these are obviously commandlets you would want to look for as far as detection goes. Who's using these, why they're using them, why was it in the middle of the night from an account that normally doesn't have any access to servers, stuff like that, right? So those are really good little points to look for. And then in the GUI, on the server side here, you just go to manage, add feature roles. Now, PSWA is a little bit tricky to find, but you would install IIS, as you see. And then within all the features here, if you scroll down, I already had it open, it's under Windows PowerShell, under Windows PowerShell Web Access. So you just enable that, and you're good to go. So there's kind of the quick and dirty ways to get it going. And you can see in the script here, it's just using install Windows feature for Windows PowerShell Web Access. So that's all there. All right, so since I already have it installed, we're good to go. The bigger pieces you would want to look at, right, are like, managing IIS. So inside your IIS manager, you'll note a couple things in here. You'll see your default website, your site for it. The application pool, the default name is PSWA pool. This is kind of just the default. If somebody were to change it, you have to manually do that. It's not just something that you could just do. So you have to come in here and actually change it yourself. Same with the URI, things like that. So all of this you would have to modify. Now, when it comes to logging, in the blog, I call out how to capture all the IIS logs. So if you have IIS enabled today and you're collecting it, it's as simple as this, right? So just go and, in my particular case, I just said grab every log file from inetpub. In your case, it could be different. You may need to, specify certain paths. You might have a D drive for all your logs, whatever it may be. You just modify that input and make sure this is all set up for logging. Sometimes if these aren't set up for logging, if a site is not logging properly, You just have to enable like the logging module, and I give you the commands in the blog, so it's pretty easy to follow. But most IIS is typically logging, so you're good on that front. Okay. All right, so enabling, logging, and all of that. So in this particular case, the machine we're on today has PSWA installed. Now, if I was a real elite APT, I would be connecting to this probably from like maybe another machine or an adversary controlled machine. So look at this box as kind of like that PowerShell web access gateway machine. I'm just connecting to it from localhost. And this is just a simple demo here. So I'm just going to type in my info. Now I can type in this particular machine's name, ARWin2, but what I really want to connect to is the domain controller. So I just pop that in there, and you can see all the different options down here. There's really no need to change anything unless you really want to. But otherwise, just go ahead and hit sign in, and it'll go through. And so now we're on ARWin2. You could just run your who am I. You can run your host name. So yeah, we're on the remote machine now. Now on the other side of this is that endpoint, that domain controller. WSM prov host is now spawning child process events of who am I and host name. Let's make this interesting. So I copied a bunch of commands here from the blog. I'm just gonna do Control C, come back here, paste all that in there, and just hit submit. And that'll go. You can see it's running, and it'll just kind of burn through each one of these. Now note that the last thing I have in here is actually enabling PowerShell Web Access. So if it's maybe another server that has IIS already, you could go ahead and just kick this off, and it will start installing PSWA on every other remote machine that we connect to here, which is kind of cool, right? So we can now more or less just install this left and right, and then just remote into that one, do whatever we want to do from there. So yeah, that's that. And all of this completed, you can copy out, we could run just this one if we're curious. You just, took everything. Let's just run one of them, get service here. So it's still going. It's gonna, but yeah, so you can hit cancel as well. It's kind of neat. But yeah, hit exit if you want to exit. You can see all your history as well, and tab up and down, enter, things like that, all that works. So every bit of it is just as if you were in a true PowerShell console on that particular box. Pretty cool. All right, so exit, get out, maybe if it clicks. All right, so there's that. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears now. We'll log into Splunk, look at some of the data, and see what we can do from there. So now looking at it from a logging perspective, the blog covers a few different sources. So I'm just going to kind of dig through that, and we'll kind of dive and see what we find. So the first query I wrote was, if you have everything logging properly, specifically IIS or any kind of proxy or web app, anything, these logs do dump really well. So in this case, it's just using the web data model. It parses, it normalizes, and the idea is just to look for PSWA occurring. And so you can see here, we see the path, the source path and the paths and everything like that hitting PSWA, which would signify that there is a PowerShell web access box in your environment. So it's a good hunting query. Let's just find where these things are. And I also provide the direct source type query. So this is just straight that MSIIS Splunk source type. And again, just showing you, hey, there is PowerShell Web Access running in your environment. So you can kind of dig through and say, hey, I know that server, I don't know that server, why is it running, things like that. And so then switching gears to more of inside the Windows event log, security event log, looking for the application pool PSWA. And in this case, it's event code 4648. And I kind of added a bunch of cool things in here. I wanted you to be able to see, is PowerShell Web Access running, which host, the process, how many connection attempts this machine has seen, Is there any unique target accounts or target servers? And then what are those target servers list? And so again, this is the host is AR-Win2 connecting to localhost or AR-Win DC. So it kind of gives you a little bit of like, whoa, hey, like this box is actually acting as that web access gateway to connect to other machines. And so then I took it a little bit further, taking it to say, hey, like let's look at those connection attempts, successful logins and unsuccessful logins. And with that, we were able to kind of pull out a little bit more details, which is really cool. Now we see there was 2 successful logins, people accessing it, 2 logged in. These are the usernames that they used, and the logon type, which is remote or /network. So a lot more details. I know there's a PowerShell web access box in my environment. There's connections, login attempts, everything like that occurring. We see that this particular user is fanning out to 2 machines. That's very interesting and obviously should be looked into, right? So yeah, so from there, I'm going to go to the next one. So event log, security event log, and then now on like the EDR front, in this particular case, now we're looking for, as more of a hunting query, looking for WSM prov host spawning processes. What is it spawning, things like that. So these are coming from 4688 event logs, and we may see some sysmon in here. Nope, just all 4648, 4688. And you can see these are all the commands spawning the child process right here. There's our host name, there's a who am I probably in here, and then we ran those commands twice, so that's why we see kind of dupes right now. But you get the idea that these are basically everything that's getting kicked off on that process remotely. And these are against, obviously, AR-Win DC. So we now know, based on the successful logins, PSWA is running. We saw logins with the administrator account and connection attempts to AR-Win DC. And then now on the endpoint side, we see the administrator account with the WSM prov host, which is PowerShell remoting, spawning child process events, and then these are the command lines related to it, which we ran. And then another query we have, which comes straight from the research.splunk.com site. This is looking for WSM prov host, WMI-PRVSE, which is basically all the PowerShell remoting processes, spawning command or PowerShell, things like that, and not Windows CCM, which is like your SCCM environment, things like that. So we can see here, just based on PowerShell alone, we see obviously things occurring that are suspicious and should be looked into on the AR-Win DC host. So that concludes our demo. We went into enabling PowerShell web access, talked a little bit about the commandlets and detection opportunities. We did look at PowerShell web access. We clicked through, ran a bunch of atomic tests. We then looked at logging as well there at the beginning, and then we looked at the data in Splunk. And then from there, I'll leave you with this. Check out the blog. There's a lot more details in the blog and just some other opportunities as well as for detection goes. Thank you for listening. Cool. That was an awesome demo. I really like PowerShell Web Access. I think it's a really novel way to gain access and move around. So a couple key takeaways as far as like attack surface or tactics or defense strategies go. It's browser based, right? Multiple methods for silently installing it, and you can install this remotely on machines using PowerShell remoting, which is pretty cool. Like if you just want to install it on all the machines, you can go and do that as well. It's definitely very attractive for adversaries, being that we can install this, log into it, and begin to do whatever on one-to-many. Adversaries could absolutely use this. We see it with this cybersecurity advisory. that they're using it. It's in the wild, right? So it's something to kind of monitor for and keep track of. And that's where a lot of the content I wrote for this comes from. Some of it focuses on that application pool. Some of it focuses on hitting the PSWA, URI, things like that. Trying to be holistic about it, because as a defender, we have to think kind of like all the different angles, looking for the different pieces. And of course, with your data, dig into it, find out stuff that will occur when you're using this. In particular, on endpoint, most orgs have an EDR, so looking for suspicious child process events coming off of WSM prov host for PowerShell remoting. Keeping an eye on that process or any of the PowerShell remoting behaviors in your organization will make a big difference. So it's definitely worth making sure you're able to kind of see and have that visibility into everything out there. So thank you so much for staying and listening to this demo. Hopefully it brought some knowledge and some interesting adversary tradecraft to you. I hope you have a great day. Thanks.